What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? I want to talk to you about some of the best prospects we'll get to see in some premier matchups today from college football. Now, it's week 2. We don't have as many good matchups as we did in week 1. One game you want to keep an eye on, though, is Oregon versus Ohio State. Oregon, I think, is currently number 12 in the country. Ohio State's number 3. And that game kicks off at noon on Fox. Now, there's a bunch of prospects for the 2022 NFL Draft you need to keep an eye on. Real briefly for Ohio State, I'm going to touch on the one guy everyone's going to be talking about, and probably the guy everyone's going to be looking at, even though he's not eligible for the 2022 NFL Draft. It's CJ Stroud. And up and down week 1. Really seemed to turn on in the second half of the game against Minnesota. The first half did not look good. Came back out in the second half. Ended up throwing for 4 touchdowns and 1 interception in that game. So that's someone to keep an eye on for 2023. But if you want to focus solely on 2022, it starts off with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Obviously, the wide receivers for Ohio State are phenomenal. Both projected to be first-round picks. Garrett Wilson had 5 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown last week. Chris Olave did better and proved why a lot of people have him as wide receiver 1 in the class. 4 receptions for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. Keep an eye on those guys. Another receiver for them, or another pass catcher, I should say. Jeremy Ruckert, tight end, primarily known as a blocking tight end, one of the best blocking tight ends in the country right now. Only had 1 reception for 15 yards last week. Ohio State does not use their tight ends a lot, which is unfortunate for Ruckert because he really could compete to possibly be tight end 1 in this class, really. But he just doesn't get utilized enough in the passing game to really have that opportunity. Running back, who's probably seeing his draft stock fall quite a bit. It's also, unfortunately, Master Teague. 6 attempts for 29 yards last week. That's just not good enough. There were a lot of concerns about Teague last year. Maybe not having the explosiveness that some people were expecting him to have. Still has a lot of power, obviously, but I think we saw last week, I forget whose name it was, but Ohio State had a really good running back last week. I think it was only a sophomore who really tore it up. So I think Master Teague seeing his stock fall as well as maybe his playing time decline while at Ohio State. So this is a guy who could probably still go in day 3 in 2022 NFL Draft, but will no longer be competing for a third-round kind of position or anything like that. Who else to keep an eye on? Thayer Munford, who's playing guard for them right now because they have Nicholas Petit-Frere, I believe is how you say his last name, or Frere, maybe? I'm not entirely sure. I've listened to the pronunciation on the broadcast before. I just can't quite get it down yet. But he's playing left tackle, and they've moved Thayer Munford into left guard, so that's the dominant left side of the offensive line. Keeping an eye on both those players. That's about it for Ohio State's offense. Defensively, you've got Tyreke Smith and Zach Harrison, the defensive ends for them, who were dominant against Minnesota, or at least very good against Minnesota. Tyreke Smith had 3 tackles. Zach Harrison had that 1 sack and forced fumble and 2 tackles in the game. By the way, that forced fumble turned into a Haskell Garrett fumble recovery for a touchdown. He's a defensive tackle for them. He's like a super senior at this point. He had 2 tackles as well. So that defensive front has 3 key pieces on to keep an eye on. Linebacking core doesn't really have anyone. Most of the linebackers went in last year's NFL Draft. I think actually almost all of them went. Pete Warner went to the Saints. Baron Brown, I think, went to Denver, maybe? And then it was Justin Hilliard also went in that draft class. So there's been a lot of guys. I think, was Chris Borland also there? I think they had a lot of players all go in the draft class. So the linebacking core for Ohio State right now is kind of depleted. I do have someone in the secondary, though, Sevyn Banks, who's going to make his season debut this week against Oregon because he did not play last week. And switching over to the Oregon side of things, not as many prospects as Ohio State, but certainly still some talented pieces. That's why they're ranked number 11 in the country right now, or number 12, excuse me. Running back CJ Verdell, I believe is how I say his last name. He had 18 attempts for 74 yards and a touchdown last week. Also another running back, Travis Dye, 13 attempts for 64 yards and a touchdown last week as well. So the running backs for Oregon are going to be very key for them. Also, junior center Alex Forsyth is one of the better centers in the NFL when it comes to pass blocking, so I would keep an eye on him throughout this whole process. See how that develops. Again, in the conference they're playing in, fast blocking centers are probably going to perform fairly well. We'll see if that translates into something that maybe translates to the NFL, maybe it doesn't. We'll see how that works out. Sophomore wide receiver Devin Williams. There's a lot of hype around this guy. He's a former USC player. He transferred to Oregon. Still has not had like that big breakout campaign yet, but there's still a lot of respect for him. A lot of people are talking about him being a potential star for the team. We'll see if that actually plays out this year or not, but there's still a lot of hype around him, so I want to include him on these rankings. And it sounds like sophomore edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeau will be good to go today. That's someone everyone wants to keep an eye on. Obviously, he's projected to be the best edge rusher in this class, and potentially even the number 1 overall draft pick for 2022. He had a sack, a forced fumble, and 2 tackles last time he saw the field. So we'll see if Kayvon Thibodeau is 100% in this game, and if he can make an impact against a pretty solid Ohio State offensive line. two other defensive prospects for Oregon who I think are both going to be drafted probably in day 2 or if not day 1. Cornerback Mikhail Wright. I'm not sure if I'm saying that last name right, but or first name right. I'm hoping I am. 6 tackles and a forced fumble in his first game with Oregon this year, so things looking up for him. And then sophomore safety Vernon McKinley III had 8 tackles in his last outing. So there's some good defensive backs coming out of Oregon. And obviously, we had a couple guys come out last year from Oregon who did fairly well. One being Javon Holland, who was drafted in the 2nd round by the Miami Dolphins. So they've had a good secondary in Oregon. And they're known to kind of produce solid secondary players. But Wright, I think, actually has a really good chance to go almost in the 1st round, maybe even be a 1st-round pick if he has a good season. McKinley's kind of buried underneath a very good safety class, but he's still probably, to me, at least a solid day 2 pick. So he's going to go in either the 2nd or 3rd round. And that about wraps up the preview for this group of NFL prospects that are going to be appearing in this Oregon versus Ohio State game. I'm going to post another video later today. It's going to be breaking down Michigan versus Washington. That's the 8 p.m. game on ABC. Neither of those team schools are ranked right now, but they both have several NFL prospects that I would like to cover. Because mostly, today's kind of like the week 1, even though it's almost week 2, but it feels like week 1 because there's a lot of soft games this week. A lot of ranked teams playing unranked teams. A lot of easy wins on the schedule, at least in theory. So we'll see how that all plays out today. Hopefully, there's some upsets, or hopefully there's some close games to kind of keep us all entertained. But for now, thank you for watching. I hope you all check in for the next video.